Hello, my name is Matthew Hull. I'm in the Department of Anthropology here. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Professor Khalid Ansari. He is the director of Dr. Ambedkar Center for Exclusion Studies and Transformative Action, and a senior assistant professor in Glocal Law School at Glocal University. His academic work broadly focuses on social and cultural theory, issues of democracy and counterpublic, social movements, caste and religion, conflict studies, and subaltern social histories. He has an MBA from Aligarh Muslim University, MA in sociology from Malay University. He's currently completing a PhD at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht in the Netherlands, with a dissertation entitled Pluralism, Development and Democracy, an explorative case study of the Pasmanda controversy. He's also been deeply involved in grassroots organizing and scholarly interventions to publicize the history of resistance movements. From 2006 to 2013, he was the founding coordinator of the innovative Patna Collective, which has branches in both Patna and New Delhi. It's a project to articulate, generate, and disseminate critical knowledge on new possibilities for social and political transformation. He's widely published in journals of all kinds and many edited volumes. The list is way too long to even think about going through. He also has a huge media presence. He's published in Hindi and in English in international, national, and local and more regional presses, including the Economic and Political Weekly, the Indian Express, Dainik Hindustan, Prabhat Khabar, and the Hindu. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Ansari.
Thank you for the charitable introduction. Before I begin, I would like to thank the Center for South Asian Studies and Farina Mir in particular for having me here and for giving me an opportunity to co-reflect with the audience on many of the themes that I have been exploring in the last 10 years or so. I see myself primarily as a practitioner of the Pasmanda movement, which is the movement of lower caste Muslims in North India. I also dabble in academics, as the introduction suggested. But I don't find the distinction between activist and academic very useful for my work for various reasons. So I have a few pages with me, which I'm going to read. And there are a few images that I might use just to give you a broad sense of what the movement is all about. In 1997, the late Susan Oken initiated a debate on feminism and multiculturalism in the Boston Review by posing a very specific question: is multiculturalism bad for women? Her object of reflection was the frequent collision between the norm of gender equality and the minority claims of protection of diversity, especially in the context of illiberal cultures. Employing a number of illustrations from the social history of the West, she pointed out how the advocates of minority rights have under-addressed this tension through the technology of monolithization of culture on the one hand and invisibilization of the private domestic sphere on the other. In contrast to the proponents of multiculturalism, who saw the cultural unit as the key axis for moral training, self-esteem, and the realization of the good life, Oken was at pains in demonstrating a different story. Mainly how cultures were also sites of male hegemony and patriarchal practices, and therefore their protection may more often than not work against ensuring dignity, self-esteem, or participation for a vast majority of women. Since Oken's posing of this fundamental question, the debate has grown in its complexity, and the rights of minorities within minorities, or internal minorities, have gained some attention. The reason I'm starting with this fragment is because the movement I've been studying in the last few years, the Pasmanda movement, seems to be asking an analogous question in the South Asian context. Is multiculturalism or minority rights frame bad for the subordinated caste groups? Muslims usually use the term Zaat or Biradari for referring to caste and the Anthropological Survey of India's Ambitious People of India project informs us that there are about 705 biradaris or occupational groups in the Indian Muslim community. However, despite the ubiquitous presence of caste in the community, it is the elephant in the room that no one ever wishes to talk about. In contrast to other segmentations, for instance, on the basis of gender, class, region, language, or maslak, sects, caste is particularly seen as a deviation by many Muslims. Largely because caste is hegemonically framed as an institutional norm of the Hindu community, with which the Muslims share an animated history of conflict, arguably accentuated further with the interventions of the colonialist knowledge power regimes from the early 19th century onwards. If Islam is conceived as an egalitarian religion, tradition and caste are hierarchical Hindu one, then any presence of caste within Indian Muslims can only be posed as a regrettable variation, either as a residue from the deficient conversion process to Islam from Hindu caste communities in historical time, or the outcome of acculturative influence of Hinduism, which will subsequently be ironed out with increasing Islamization. However, the recent politicization of lower caste Muslims in North India in the form of the Pasmanda movement has indicated at the recalcitrance of the caste question within Indian Islam. Here I would like to outline the conditions of possibility for the availability of caste as a category in conducting Muslim politics and the various discursive ruptures it has activated. As we know, there is a substantial body of work that has interrogated the Orientalist colonialist inquiries of caste within the orthodox, heterodox, great tradition, little tradition, tradition modernity, binaries, and has traced the implications of caste with power in historical time. Also, the process of modernization in the post-colonial phase did not result in the anticipated transcendence or annihilation of primordial identities like caste or religion, but rather in their re-articulation as potent categories in the political sphere. Along similar lines, caste as a category for conducting politics was available to the Muslim community from at least the early part of the 20th century onwards, when various caste associations that worked as both pressure groups and reformist collectives came to be established. The first wave of caste politics within Indian Muslims can be traced back to the formation of the All India Movement Conference in Rohtas, Bihar in 1925, which strived to mobilize the subordinated caste Muslims in order to contest the elite, high caste, Sharif hegemony. The Movement Conference, under the charismatic leadership of Abdul Qayyum Ansari, challenged the communal articulation of Muslim League politics and squarely opposed the separatist project of Pakistan informed by the two-nation theory. However, despite limited success and due to various historical factors, the movement lost steam in the post-independence phase and was co-opted in what Kothari once referred to as the Congress system. The second wave of Muslim caste politics was activated as a consequence of Mandal politics in the 1990s, with the formation of the All India Backward Muslim Morcha by Dr. Ijaz Ali in 1994 and the All India Pasmanda Muslim Mahaz by Ali Anwar in 1998 in Bihar. Ali Anwar advanced the first major articulation of Pasmanda politics in his book Masawat Ki Jang, translated as the Battle for Equality. Pasmanda, a Persian term meaning those who have fallen behind, refers to Muslims belonging to the Shudra, that is the backward or Ajlaf Muslims, Ati Shudra, that is the Dalit or Arzal Muslims, and Adivasis, that is the indigenous tribal Muslims. So Shudra untouchability is not practiced with Shudra caste, while the Dalit Arzal Muslims, they encounter untouchability in their daily lives, and Adivasis obviously refers to the indigenous populations. Both these three categories are present in Muslims, just like in any other community in India. Broadly, the Mahaz enacted the Pasmanda as an oppositional identity to that of the dominant Sharif Muslims and foregrounded the conflation of the interests of the latter with the politics around Islam and minority rights. The dominant perception is that Islam is an egalitarian religion and that Indian Muslims on the whole, especially in the post-such scenario, constitute a subaltern community. The Pasmanda counter discourse takes issues with both these formulations. In terms of theological hermeneutics, Masood Alam Falahi's work, Hindustan Mein Zaat Paat aur Musalman, has persuasively demonstrated how the notion of kufu, or rules about possible marriage relations between groups, was read through the lens of caste by the Manuwadi ulema, and how a parallel system of graded inequality was put into place in Indian Islam. As far as the social sphere is concerned, Ali Anwar's Masawat has documented caste-based disenfranchisement of Pasmanda Muslims at the hands of self-styled Ashraf leaders in community organizations like madrasas and personal law boards, representative institutions, parliament and state assemblies and departments, state ministries and institutions that claim to work for Muslims, minority affairs, waqf boards, Urdu academies, AMU, Jamia, so on and so forth. As Akbar Allahabadi satirically said earlier, council mein bahut sayyid, masjid mein faqat jumman. So this is a verse where jumman refers to Muslims from the weaver caste. Flavia said earlier that Muslims don't have any voice. Pasmanda Discourse would disagree with that. If you look, for example, let me give you some data. If you look at the list of the parliamentarians, MPs, who have been elected in the last 60 years in India, then there have been 7,500 total MPs. Out of these 7,500 total MPs, Muslims are around 400. Out of 400, the Ashraf or the upper caste Muslims would be 340, and the Pasmandas would be 60. So if you do the analysis, then the population of Ashraf in India is 2.01% of the whole Indian population, 2.01%. And the representation in the parliament has been 4.5%. The population of Pasmanda is around 11%, and their representation has been 0.5%. So this entire notion that Muslims don't have voice, or Muslims as a whole are a marginalized community, I think it represses various internal inequalities within Muslims. And it needs to be brought out, just like the Pasmanda movement is doing. That is only one segment in the political sphere as far as MPs are concerned. If you do this mathematics even in civil services, even in the government services, in the private sector, in media, my speculation is that the data will not vary much. But I'll move on. The book also underlines stories of humiliation, discrimination, and violence on caste grounds that various Pasmanda communities have to undergo on a daily basis. Various pejorative idioms and jokes are circulated about Pasmanda communities, so much so that the very titles of various communities are often used as curse words. There are also reports which document altercations over inter-caste marriages, burial of lower castes in the community graveyards, and in a few mosques in Bihar if lower castes try to occupy the front rows during prayers. There is also evidence of social boycott, caste atrocity, or extravagant revenge or spectacular violence extracted by higher caste Muslims. Thus, Pasmanda commentators contest the two key elements of mainstream Muslim or minority discourse, Islam as an egalitarian religion, and Indian Muslims on the whole as an oppressed community. Islam may be normatively egalitarian, though I have different views on that, but I won't go into that right now. Islam may be normatively egalitarian, but actual existing Islam in Indian conditions is deeply hierarchical. Similarly, all Muslims are not oppressed. Muslims are a differentiated community in terms of power with dominant and subordinated sections. Consequently, the so-called minority politics, which has been quite content in raising symbolic and emotional issues so far, Babri, AMU, personal law, Urdu, is really the politics of dominant caste Muslims in the view of Pasmanda commentators. So if you look at Urdu, only about 1% Muslims can read and write Urdu in India. Why is Urdu a Muslim issue? If you look at Aligarh Muslim University, it's only one university. Can one university in such a large country really cater to the educational requirements of all Muslims? If you look at Babri Mosque, the politics of piety, that has to be interrogated. Similarly, personal law. We all know what's happening. Flavia was already has been engaging with that question for quite some time. But look at the responses. Immediately after the judgment, the response of the Muslim Personal Law Board, people like Madani. And what is there in this debate for Muslim women, like Flavia said? So the Pasmanda argument would be that all these issues, they really help to enforce the Ashraf identity, the Muslim identity. As Toni Morrison said, in America, to be an American actually means white. Everyone else has to hyphenate. That is something which also works in the context of Muslim politics in India. Can I just show a few images? These are a few images. This is about the spectacular violence that I was talking about. It happened in Bihar. So this is Muslim violence. So far in India, there has been a discussion on Hindu violence between higher caste Hindus and lower caste Hindus, and Hindu-Muslim violence. But the Muslim violence is completely missing in Indian discussions. This is Abdul Qayyum Ansari, who was the founder of the Moment Conference. This is Asim Bihari, who was also, these figures we hardly know. We would know Zakir Hussain, we would know Abul Kalam Azad. Even a recent volume by one Pakistani scholar on partition historiography, there's no mention of Moment Conference, no separate chapter on Moment Conference. Published just this. This is Ali Anwar. This is his book, Masavat Kijam, there's an English translation. Masood Alam Farah, his book, Masood Alam the Pasmanda school had come to it. This is a very interesting poem by a Telugu poet, Sheikh Kiran Borewala. Call me Borewala, or call me a Girijan Muslim, or call me a Dalit Muslim, or call me any other Muslim. But one thing is certain, if I don't weave a bora, your janaza won't move. So bora means a jute cloth which is used to wrap the coffins before they are buried. Right. So this is a community which stitches those jute mats. And if I don't weave a bora, your janaza means
funeral procession?
Yeah. So your janaza won't move. From the oppression of the Hindu order and the discrimination in the mullah order, I am waking up only now, leaving the inertia and indifference that burned me for decades. I'm sounding the marfa. Marfa is the beautiful marfa of the Borewalas. So I just wanted to just demonstrate the tone and tenor of this new poetry that is emerging, but it is hardly being discussed in the academic sphere or even the political sphere. This is an image from the protests. Pasanda Muslimon की स्थिति पाकिस्तान में ज़्यादा खराब है. So there is discussion of the situation of Pasanda Muslims in Pakistan.
But this is worse. So there's a comparative dimension at least, right?
This is the movement journey, Pasmanda Awas, the voice of the Pasmanda. That is a recent Pasmanda Kranti Abhyar. You can look at the picture of Kabir here. So Kabir is a North Indian saint. So Pasmandas, they find the closest with Kabir. The other are key figures. So, in a way, all these four issues which I just mentioned, which form the critical elements in the minority rights frame or minority discourse in India, they are being destabilized and ruptured by the Pasmanda discourse. Let me illustrate this by 5 key moves made by the Pasmanda ideologues. Firstly, there is an attempt to transcend the trap of competitive religious nationalism by enacting a new social identity, the Pasmanda, and deconstructing the hegemonic nature of majority-minority dichotomy by revealing that both sides of the binary are dominated by high caste. It is not only about the Hindu right, it is also about the Muslim right. And they are not their equivalents, because the Hindu right is obviously more powerful than the Muslim right. But the Muslim right plays a legitimizing role for the Hindu right. And there is a symbiotic relationship between Hindu and Muslim right. And if we don't take both of them front on, then there's a problem. And that is what the Pasmanda movement is trying to foreground. The Pasmanda political subject is thus framed as the victim of both majoritarian and minoritarian politics and located outside the majority-minority dichotomy. As the poet saint from Varanasi and an ancestor of the Pasmandas, Kabir, said, "Chalti chakki dekhkar diya kabira kabira roye, do patan ke beech mein sabut bacha na koye." Looking at the grinding stones, Kabir laments, "In the duel of wheels, nothing stays intact." Ali Anwar articulates this through interesting symbolic inversions. Ali Anwar says, "हम शुद्धर हैं शुद्धर, भारत के मूल निवासी हैं, बाद में मुसलमान." We are Shudras first. We are the indigenous peoples of India. We are Muslims later. Second quotation. Now the time is ripe for Pasmanda Muslims to craft their own identity. The identity of Pasmanda Muslims was hitherto obscured in the name of minority. Now we fear the word minority and feel that it is a fake word. He uses the term chalia, which is a Bhojpuri term, chalia, fake. In the name of minority, either someone terrorizes us, that is the Hindu majority, or someone snatches away our rights, that is the Muslim elite. In real terms, we are the majority or Bahujans in this country. Secondly, the secular communal diet is also challenged. While secular politics is embraced as a desirable norm, there is also a realization that the actually existing secular politics is dominated by powerful caste groups. The inaugural issue of Mahaz's journal Pasmanda Awaz proclaims, "Secularism is not only our motto, but rather it's an article of faith for us." However, this initial enthusiasm subsides in other writings. Now, to keep on reiterating secularism day in and day out won't do. One will also have to be democratic. Some people only know how to get our votes. Now they will also have to learn to give us votes. In fact, there is a stress on symbiotic relationship between majority and minority communalism, and the Pasmanda movement proposes to contest minority fundamentalism from within in order to wage a decisive battle against majoritarian fundamentalism at the national level. As Waqar Hawari, a Pasmanda activist, says, while Muslim politicians like Imam Bukhari and Sayyid Shahabuddin add the jolan, that is the starter yogurt. When you prepare the yogurt, there is a starter yogurt which is added, that is known as jolan. So, while Muslim politicians like Imam Bukhari and Sayyid Shahabuddin add the jolan or starter yogurt, it is left to the Hindu fundamentalists to prepare the yogurt of communalism. Both of them are responsible. We oppose the politics of both Hindu and Muslim fanaticism. There is also a realization that in most instances of communal or Islamophobic violence, it is the Pasmanda Muslims who mostly bear the brunt. Even in the recent case of lynchings, there is not even a single upper caste Muslim who was lynched. All of them are Pasmandas. Whether it is Najib bin Jenu, whether it is Pehlu Khan in Mewat, or whether it is Latif, all of them are Pasmandas. None of them is Ashraf. None of them. Thirdly, there is an attempt to paralyze faith-based vertical social solidarities in favor of horizontal solidarities of caste groups across religions based on a shared history of misrecognition and humiliation. The Pasmanda notion of solidarity is captured succinctly by the slogan, Dalit Pishwa Ek Saman, Hindu ho ya Musalman. All Dalit backwards are alike, whether they be Hindu or Muslim. Also, as Ali Anwar suggests, there is a bond of pain between Pasmanda Dalit Muslims and OBC Dalit sections of other religions. The bond of pain is the supreme bond. We face the same issues. That is why we have to shake hands with the Dalit and OBC sections of other religions. Apart from the desired solidarity of disenfranchised castes across religions, there is an attempt at intersectionality, and the practitioners of Pasmanda movement have also tried to reach out to gender movements within Indian Muslims. The entangled nature of caste, gender, and faith emerges quite clearly in various entries in Pasmanda literature. In Masavat, the author dedicates an entire chapter, Pyar Nikah Aur Zaat Ki Pehredari, caste surveillance on love marriage. that foregrounds the issues of caste patriarchy, honor, and surveillance through various reports cases of tensions around love marriages within the country. The Pasmanda Awaz has raised questions related to dowry, the gulf between the theory and practice of Muslim representative bodies such as the All India Personal Law Board on the issues of Muslim women. It is interesting that one of the co-translators of Ali Anwar's Pasawati Jang in English is Zakia Johar, who helped found the Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan. Fourthly, there is a stress on intra-group inequality in comparison to intergroup inequality. The artisanal and working class background of most Pasmanda Muslims has resulted in their engaging with issues of social justice and equity, as reflected in the debates on positive discrimination on one level and redistributive schemes on the other. Especially after the neoliberal policies, most of the Pasmanda Muslims have been excluded from their work, from their traditional work, and there is a crisis which the Pasmanda movement is trying to address. There is also an animated debate on the reservations. So while the upper caste Muslims want reservations on the basis of religion, the Pasmanda Muslims are arguing that the reservation should be on the basis of caste, not religion. Right? So those are two key issues in the sphere of political economy, in the sphere of representation and recognition. And lastly, there is a realization that the community cannot be reformed unless the caste issue is addressed. As Ali Anwar points out, the false pride about there being no discrimination in the Muslim community on the grounds of caste and there being no untouchability prevented efforts at the religious and non-governmental level with respect to social reform or Islah Muashra. I will now move to the concluding part. There are 2 or 3 comments that I want to make. The attempt by the subordinated Muslim caste to enact a new identity and thereby qualify the mainstream Muslim minority identity may be grasped as an instance of what Connolly dubs as the bumpy politics of becoming, by which new movements jostle and disturb an established pattern of diversity as they seek a place on a modified register of legitimacy and justice. From the vantage point of the Pasmanda experience, the majority-minority or secular communal framework has neither been able to contain interreligious violence nor ensure justice to vast majority of marginalized castes. Once the caste principle is employed, the distinction of majority-minority informed primarily by religion cracks, and what emerges is a minority of dominant caste elite across religions lording over the majority of suppressed castes. Since caste movements are decentering entrenched categories which work for the interest of caste elite, the persistence of communal violence and fundamentalist trajectories in faith traditions may also be interpreted as restorative violence to arrest the democratic assertion of socially excluded caste groups. If such is the case, and some recent evidence points at the large-scale casualties of mostly Pasmanda Muslims in riots and other forms of Islamophobic violence, then we may have underplayed the role of Muslim caste as a factor in interreligious violence as well. From the emerging evidence, there are indications that the politics arranged around the category minority has resulted in the gross underrepresentation of Pasmanda Muslims in power structures on the one hand and overrepresentation in catalogues of violence and riot victims on the other. However, while the deepening of democracy has clearly interrogated the mainstream minority discourse in India, it resonates with the experience elsewhere as well. Dora Wilkinson, speaking from an Afro-American perspective, asks for a systematic questioning of ingrained seductive words and value-based constructions like minority, and radically suggests that researchers, clinicians, and teachers must seek ways to incorporate race and ethnicity in all relevant contexts and omit entirely the minority concept. Arguing from the vantage point of the post-colonial South African experience, Gia and John Comroff take cognizance of the hyper-politicization and fragmentation of identities and suggest that the term multiculturalism is insufficient to describe the fractious heterogeneity of post-colonies. They propose the term ideology and polyculturalism as post-colonial substitutes for the terms ideology and multiculturalism. I'll skip this debate. Most commentators in India, however, have opted for a deliberative consensus within the community as a way out. Partha Chatterjee, for instance, is one of the key exponents of the reforms from within approach and advances a strategic politics of toleration, which works on the principle that if the struggle is for progressive change in social practices sanctioned by religion, then that struggle must be launched and won within the religious communities themselves. I see this as a closure, primarily because the extent minority space may not be rendering justice to the sheer scale and radical diversity of new identifications and spaces of social transformation in India. For instance, in the case of caste, while its politicization has been much discussed, the recent evidence suggests its increasing culturalization as well. More and more subordinated caste units across religions are now developing their own mythologies of origin, replacing symbolisms of humiliation with pride, tracing their own heroes' icons, and reconfiguring community norms practices. Here, caste is reinvented as a cherished identity. Indeed, a community in its own right, with all its implied holistic meanings, and ceases to be a marker that in the main implied injury. As stated earlier, Muslims have about 705 caste groups, which are increasingly undergoing the process of both politicization and culturalization. Is the minority space capable enough of accommodating the symbolic and material aspirations of such a large number of groups? Is a single window transaction around religion the best way to address the emerging concerns around cultural difference? Is there a need to rethink the dominant consensus on religion as difference and caste as inequality in the face of emerging counter evidence? One is tempted to say that the minority category probably invisibilizes more than it reveals as far as modes of misrecognition and systematic exclusion are concerned, since the demographic question is central to minority politics and the Pasmanda define themselves as a majority within minority. One feels that the term minority within minority may not be adequate in capturing the Pasmanda experience of injury and disadvantage. I therefore suggest that the extent social and political conditions that circumscribe the democratic aspirations of Pasmanda Muslims have probably exceeded the context that legitimated the earlier imagination of the minority space, and therefore the ensemble of emerging contestations around social justice, majority-minority, secular communal duopolies, or reform may be provisionally termed as post-minority. The term post-minority also differs from the conservative valence and accommodation of the emancipatory subject that the term minorities within minorities implies and provides the creative opening for the reconfiguration of the constitutive conceptual violence of the nation state. It does not necessarily mean the out-and-out negation of earlier concerns around religious communalism or majoritarian assimilationism that quintessentially defined the minority space, but rather an appreciation for the dynamic nature of social space and democratic possibilities opened by recent normative symbolic inversions inaugurated by subordinate movement like the Pasmanda in South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you for that terrific talk. So we'll take questions.
Yes, thank you for a very illuminating presentation on a little recognized but a very important issue. My question is this: I'm wondering if, in a comparative context, is there anything comparable to the Pasanda movement in Pakistan or in Bangladesh? And if not, or if there are significant differences, how would you explain those differences?
In Pakistan, I don't know if there is a movement there. Most probably there is no movement as such. But there are scholars, emerging scholars and commentators, which are now using caste as a category to understand Pakistan, its nation-state project, partition, and so on and so forth. For example, Ajmal Kamal is an important voice who has looked at the Urdu adab, the Urdu literature, from the vantage point of caste. So he's a Lahore-based, what should I say? He's a Lahore-based commentator. He also has a fascination for Urdu literature, and he edits a journal. I don't recall the title of the journal. Probably it's Ajkal or something from Lahore, from Karachi, and he's using caste in his writings. Also, while I was searching online, I found a number of reports about Pakistani politicians and the various contestations around those politicians, which had a caste play in that, which had a caste element in that. So in Pakistan, yes. If you look at the matrimonial sections, caste is pretty much around, not only in Pakistan, but also in the Pakistani diaspora, which has migrated to London. So caste is very much around. It's called Haddi. So you marry after saying that is the metaphor, Haddi. So Haddi is for the caste purity. So that is what defines. So it is pretty much around all across South Asia. I don't know about Bangladesh, but if you look at the Jamaat-e-Islami and all the violence that happened, most of the Jamaat-e-Islami ideologues and leaders have been Sayyids. Even now, the Jamaat-e-Islami of India, they are in the Majlis-e-Shura, there are around 19 central members. Out of 19, 9 are Sayyids. Rest, most of them are upper caste, only 2 are Pasmandas. So if you look at Bangladesh, I'm not sure about Bangladesh. Probably our friend from Bangladesh, she would know. Yeah. But there are academic papers on caste in Bangladesh. So I have gone through a couple of papers. But I don't know at the social level how much that operates.
I was going to ask you about Bangladesh too, so I guess we have to pursue that in the break. But the other 2 questions I had for you, one was about, you kind of sort of hinted at that just now. How much does the Pasmanda movement engage with the international human rights machinery or norms in the way that Dalit groups use that in the past and currently? And secondly, the images you showed were very interesting. I was just about to ask whether there were women in the Pasmanda movement. When I slide with the women, about 4 women came up. I'm really interested to know what is the role of the side of leaders in showing, of course, but are there any
As far as the human rights discourse is concerned or organizations are concerned, if you look at the Indian civil society, it is probably dominated by the higher caste across religions. Pasmandas are nowhere. They are nowhere in those organizations. So on that count, it's a very nascent movement. In the last 15 years or so, it has gained some ground. Women, of course, Pasmanda are also patriarchal, just like most men are. So there are issues with regarding to women within the movement. But probably women have much more space within the Pasmanda discourse when compared to the mainstream Muslim. That I could only speculate about.
Thank you for a really fantastic talk. I wondered if you could speak a little bit about, you were talking about, organizing within lower caste and Dalit OBC and of course the Pasmanda groups across different religions that's happening now. Can you speak a little bit about, or is there some sort of organizing that's happening across religions in the lower castes and Pasmanda groups?
Yes, if you look at BAMSEV, so BAMSEV, if you're aware, stands for Backward and Minority Communities Employees Federation. It was started by Kachiram in the early 80s. In 1986, probably there was a split in BAMSEV. There were 2 major factions. One went with the BSP, with what Mayawati is associated with. It emphasized on the political. The BAMSEV, which was with Mayawati and Kachiram, it emphasized on the political, while the other BAMSEV, it emphasized on the social. Right. So again, it's a typical replay of the social reform versus political reform debate that was also witnessed during the colonial era, especially between Gandhi and Ambedkar. So I won't go into that. But the second BAMSEV, there's one group which is headed by Sri Ram Maurya, who is the president. It has changed its constitution now. Previously it was minorities. Now it says SC, ST, OBC, and the minorities converted from these 3 groups. So they have excluded the Ashrafs, the Sharifs, and the Christian upper caste, and the Sikh upper caste, as far as the definition is concerned. SC, ST, OBCs, that is the Mool Nivasis, or the indigenous peoples, and those who have converted from them. So that is the interesting take. And BAMSEV, it is organizing in UP and Bihar. And Pasmanda movement, it works very closely with these groups. As for instance, our new Bahujan spaces like Roundtable India. So if you look at Roundtable India, which is a blog, so it is one of the first websites or first online spaces that really gave the space to Pasmanda to articulate their concerns. Other sites, we used to send our articles, they were always rejected. Many young activists, they send their articles, they were rejected for so many reasons. So I think there is some intersectionality, some organizing across religion for lower caste that is happening.
Great. Khalid, thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation, both really informative and giving us a clear sense of the movement. So I have, the mic is not on. Okay, that doesn't on. So thank you for your presentation. I have two questions for you. So one is, on this question of reservations. Okay, so you said that that the Pasmanda movement is asking for reservations, is trying to shift the advocacy for reservations away from Muslims as a minority being included, which is supported, right, by kind of socioeconomic data. But the point you made about this split within the community makes sense. But trying to articulate a position that Pasmanda Muslims on the basis of caste should be included. But the question is, if the state does not recognize caste among Muslims, right, in the sense of the constitution, and so Sikh caste is recognized, but the language of the state is around minority and majority, how effective can you be? So it's a two-pronged approach. One is you've got to fight the dominant factions within the Muslim community, but how effective are you being in getting the state to recognize caste as a social reality among Muslims? So that's a question around reservations. And the second one is also to ask the extent to which, you've talked to us about Pasmanda ideologues and the Pasmanda movement and what's being articulated largely from a kind of top-down approach, right? Going back to the Moment Conference, et cetera. So these are leaders of the movement. Can you give us any evidence of the extent to which Pasmanda as an identity is actually being embraced by Muslims that are being identified as Pasmanda by you? So I don't have a very good sense, quite honestly, of the extent to which this is kind of, ideological formation or social movement. Maybe that's the crux of the question. Thanks.
First question, if you look at the history of reservations in India, then there are two high points. One is the Kaka Kalika Commission, and the second was the Mandal Commission for the OBCs. Both these reports recognized Muslim caste. So the state recognizes Muslims, but as OBCs, not as scheduled caste. So Muslim lower caste were availing of reservations before 1950.
So can I ask for a clarification? Yeah. Right, OBC was other backward castes and classes. So are they actually recognizing them as castes?
As castes.
And not class?
Because OBC is other backward classes in constitution. So there is no caste mentioned there. But for all practical purposes, classes translate as caste. And there's a long debate on that.
Right, but I would also argue that's an important distinction, right, that should be made there. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. No, there is a distinction. But if you look at Ambedkar said very categorically that in terms of OBCs, it's basically the Shudra caste groups, which would come under OBCs. As subsequent judgment for Indra Sahni judgment also somehow upheld that position. Right? So for all practical purposes, those classes, the castes are treated as classes. And that is also the Lohiite influence on Indian policies. So Lohia was very clear that caste is class in India. So on that count, that has an impact on the policy. The second question, I think if you pick any movement, there is always a gap between the enactment of the identity and the sedimentation of the identity. So that is true for almost any movement. So if you look at the history of the Afro-American movement, then from nigger to black to Afro-American and so on and so forth. If you look at the Dalits, from Achut to Harijan, then to Dalit. So if you go on the field, which activists, that is the term which activists are very fond of using on the field. So if you go to the field, then hardly 85% people, hardly 15% scheduled caste would recognize themselves as Dalits. And that is what many activists, they lament about, that they don't call themselves Dalits. They don't know what Dalit is, because there is always a gap. I think that holds true for Pasmanda as well. So Pasmanda as an entity, where it was 20 years back, it is not now. It is now discussed. It is being discussed vigorously in the public sphere. More and more Pasmanda Muslims are now identifying with the Pasmanda project. They're calling themselves Pasmanda. They're changing their names. For example, Muhammad Usman, his name was Muhammad Usman. He was a painter, right? And when he joined the movement, he changed his name to Usman Halalpur. So he actually added his caste identity to that. Many Muslims who used the term Ansari, the weavers, they are dropping Ansari using the word Julaha to affirm their caste and contest the invisibilization that happened because of the minority politics. So that is happening, I think. That would be my response.
My question is regarding. I'm interested in hearing what is the reaction of the non-Pasmanda Muslim community to the Pasmanda movement, and from what we've learned from Flavia's presentation, that there is generally, well, the Muslims in India are experiencing some kind of opposition, and they're generally in a vulnerable position. So, I mean, learning from similar movements in Pakistan, I can imagine like is the reaction somewhat that given that we're all vulnerable right now, we should be united, and the fact that the Pasmanda are trying to highlight themselves as a separate movement, does that kind of show that the Muslims themselves are so fabricated and kind of puts them on a more vulnerable position? So I'm wondering if the other Muslims, and particularly the higher caste Muslims, have given that kind of reaction to the movement.
Yeah, the higher caste as a class have been vehemently in opposition to the movement. So that goes without saying. I mean, even in the so-called Hindu society, there is this famous conflict between Gandhi and Ambedkar on the Pune Pact. It's exactly on those lines. And incidentally, the Moment Conference, one of the key figures of Moment Conference, they also asked for a separate electorate in 1938, just like the Dalits asked for a separate electorate. Even the Moments, the lower caste, they said we are different from those Muslims. We should be identified as a separate community in 1938. So there is a long history of this hostility between the upper caste practitioners of minority politics and between the lower caste movement. So it is true for any community in India, whether it is a Christian community, Hindu community, Muslims, every community has caste. So the Dalit Christians would be facing problems from the Syrian Christians or from the upper caste Christian groups. The Mazhabi Sikhs would be facing a problem from the Jat or Khatri groups, the upper caste Sikh groups. And that holds true for the Pasmanda community as well, the Muslim community as well. That is what the movement is all about, the cleavages on caste, the caste-based cleavages within the community.
Thank you, Khalid. Thank you, Khalid. This was very thought-provoking. You're right about the Muslim violence being underreported. I mean, another aspect of that violence which is underreported is the violence within the lower castes, right? Like the Karamchedu massacre from the 90s. Recently, 2 years ago, the couple that was found murdered by the rail tracks in Tamil Nadu, both were Dalits but different castes. And so I was just curious if you want to speak about the contradictions within the Pasmanda movement. Which community, which Dalit community, or even Dalit and Shudra, there are contradictions, and Dalit and Adivasi, there are major contradictions. And I was wondering if you'd like to speak about it.
Yeah, Dr. Ambedkar articulated it as caste system as a system of graded inequality, where every caste thinks that there are a few castes above them and a few below them. And when I started the talk, I mentioned that Muslims have 705 castes. Obviously, even within the Pasmanda community, there are significant power differences. For example, if you look at North India, then the caste I come from, which is the Julaha or the weaver caste, it would be one of the key key champions of the Pasmanda movement, followed by the Qurayshis, the butchers, the Safis, who are the ironsmiths, then the Telis, the oil tappers. There are 5 or 6 groups. These are the biggest group within the Pasmanda. What about the Halal folk? What about the Muslim One Gujars? What about the Pavadia, the Bhat, the Nat, the Bhatiaras? These are very small communities. 2 lakh population, 50,000 population, such a large state. And whatever politics we do in the first past the post system, these small groups will never have their voice within the first past the post system. They will be always excluded. Even when the Pasmanda movement is dominant, it will only give space to 5 or 7 communities within those 600 communities. So I think almost all and that holds true for also Dalits or for also OBCs. The first past the post system has to go if the system has to be more representative. And if those minor communities, they have to have any hope of voice within the political system. So I think there are internal cleavages within any category. And there's one distinction between Pasmanda, which is a social category, when compared to Muslim, which is a theological or religious category. A theological category never changes. It is eternal. Pasmanda is only a signifier to interrogate the politics around that. It may vanish anytime, just like it has emerged at a particular point of time. Right? It is not an eternal category. It is a political category. It has a political task, and if it enables a critique of the minority politics to take ground, that would be his task.
We're almost out of time, so if you don't mind, I'll take the last 3 questions.
Absolutely.
We have one starting back here.
It's not really a question, and thank you, Khalid. I think it's one of the most cogent commentary on Indian Muslims I have heard, really connected to the ground. I just wanted to recount 2 experiences because somebody asked about higher caste versus Pasmanda. Even in states, I think there is more recognition about Pasmanda movement. They might not say it. I have a senior colleague at UCLA in neuroscience. I'm in neuroscience. And we were talking to someone else, higher caste Hindu, and he was laughing. He said, you know what, my forefathers probably converted from a lower caste and I should get the quota too. So there is more and more recognition. Now the difference that I see between Hindus and Muslims is Hindu upper caste acknowledge that there was caste, it's not anymore. Sheikhs and Sayyids, they don't even acknowledge it. I have a very close friend, he's a Sheikh, he doesn't acknowledge that there is caste. I had a friend who was a Sayyid and he was extolling the virtues of Islam and everything, and then I said, okay, tell me what's happening now, don't tell me how it should be. And I asked him, would you marry a butcher? Till that point, he was ignoring that there is no caste. He said, if she's from a butcher profession, I can marry. But from a caste, I won't. So that's the extent. That's how deep caste is in Muslims also. And it's from Hinduism.
So I guess that is a comment, not a question, is it?
Yeah.
I don't need to respond. Yeah.
Thank you, Khalid, for your wonderful presentation. I had a question about you talked about learning from other movements in the world, and you talked about the African American movement. So the question is about that. What can we learn from the African American movement? What can be adapted to the Indian context, the South Asian context, to be precise? African Americans in the United States are a numerical minority, while the Bahujan in India are actually the majority, 85% of the population. So that landscape is very different. The Brahmins are actually the minority in India, the 3% population according to 1931 census, and probably even lesser now, right? And other upper castes across religions combined, 15% are probably lesser now. So my question is, what can we really, given the different landscapes of African American movement, what can we learn from them? What are we learning from that?
2 points
in context.
We take the 2 questions together in the interest of time.
Okay, sorry. No, that's okay.
It's right, sure.
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much. Just one quick question. I wonder what is the relationship between the Pasmanda population and electoral politics? Because given what you have said about the different social differences between the Ashraf and the Pasmanda population, and how big the Pasmanda population is, I'm wondering, is there any party external to the Muslim population that tries to use or manipulate this difference between the 2 groups to try to get the vote from the Pasmanda population, which is quite sizable, Yeah, I think that's.
All the three questions will be long responses. Anyhow, so Taha, the first question regarding the conversation with the Afro-American practitioners and what is there to learn. I have two things to say. One, there will always be a difference. Even when the Afro-Americans are exploited, even when they are oppressed, they are an exploited community of the first world, right? And so that difference will always be there. So an exploited community in the first world and an exploited community in the third world, I think there is a distinction. So there is a different level of scale that one needs to understand. Second, I'm not really sure what the demographics of the US is, but from what I gather from William Connolly's writing, I think the white population would not be such a majority in terms of sheer numbers. Whiteness might be shared, whiteness as an ideology or as a frame may be shared much more widely. But in terms of actual demography, I don't think they are a majority. And when you talk about the upper caste, why only pick on Brahmins? Right. So in Dalit Bahujan discourse, it is not only about the Brahmins; it is about the Savarna or the upper caste. So they would be 15 to 20%. In places like UP, even Brahmins are 10%. And UP is the fountainhead of all communal politics because Deoband is there, Bareilly is there, Mathura is there, Kashi is there. So all kinds of interesting things are in UP. So I think that would be. I don't really know about the demographics of US.
12%. African American, about 12%.
For the whites. You add Chicanos, you add Indians, you add Hispanics, then blacks.
About 12%.
12.
After that,
Rest of white? No. 50%, yes. So it is coming down. So that is interesting because it is coming down. So that is what I find interesting.
Native Americans.
Okay. Your question. Look at the recent election in UP. Are you following India? Okay. So Bahujan Samaj Party, it gave 100 tickets to Muslims. 100 tickets. So there are 403 total assembly seats. And out of these 403, Bahujan Samaj Party, which is a Dalit party, it gave 100 tickets to Muslims. Out of these 100, only 10 candidates were Pasmanda. Out of these 100, only 10 candidates were Pasmanda. So the population of Pasmanda is 85% of Muslims, while they get only 10 tickets out of 100. Now, this is what a Bahujan party like BSP, which claims to be sensitive to caste issues in India, it is absolutely repressing the caste question within Muslims. Right? In terms of whether political parties may use the Pasmanda to their advantage, yes, that has happened in 2005 when Nitish Kumar was contesting against, JDU was contesting against RJD. So RJD was seen to be a champion of minorities, of Muslims, and Nitish Kumar launched the Pasmanda. He allied with Ali Anwar, the leader of the Pasmanda movement, and there was a 4 to 5% shift in votes, and that is what demolished LAG in 2005. Very recently, if you have noticed, then Narendra Modi, he is the first prime minister to have employed the Pasmanda category on record in the Odisha conclave. He is the first prime minister. And that is again interesting because the Congress and left parties, who are supposed to be the vanguard of the oppressed, they are not talking about the caste cleavages within Muslims, while a right-wing Hindu group, which is supposed to be an exploiter, so-called, it is addressing the Pasmanda by the term that they are using to define themselves. This is again interesting. What to make of the left and pro-minority movements in India when they can go and fight justice so far and not further. And that is the gap which is created where the white right wing moves in. It is happening in US, it is happening in India and elsewhere as well. So one has to re-understand left politics and multicultural politics There's nothing much to say about right-wing politics anyway.
So we have about 15-minute break, and then we want to get started again. Right, sharp on those at 12. Before we do that, let's